Samupe, Sampa Bietia, Chimafidi non kotu, era one radio. Samupe, Jumpa Bietia, Chimafidi non kotu, era one radio. Oh, and you pankuma, Chintu, Asam pankuma.
Hello, good evening, Era One radio listeners and viewers all over the world. It's another Thursday, incidentally or coincidentally, the first day of the month of May, the month of champions, the month that some of us were born. That is May. We are in May, so thank God for the month of liberation. Thank God for the month of May. We are continuing our study. This is the Divine Connection Show. This is where divinity meets humanity. On behalf of my studio manager, Dr. Setusu, and the Era One team, I bring you greetings. And on behalf of Reverend Pastor Robert Nisaba Akron and myself, we invite you to join us on this ride. For some time now, we've been looking at the series on King Pharaoh and the children of Israel. Last week, we looked at how desperate King Pharaoh was and what kind of desperate decision that he took. Today, we are looking at part 2. We're going to look at, and I think we did promise that Pastor Akron actually promised that he was going to lead us through the various types of arguments. So we're going to look at that tonight. We're going to look at the arguments that can force us to think, because we use the Bible as our basics, but it forces us to think. We are thinking through the Bible. The Bible is not just a history or whatever book you want to call it, but it's a book that makes us to think. It's a very good historical book, good book of literature, inspiration, prophecy, and all that. All right, we'll also be looking at how long were the Israelites in slavery. Often we read that, they were in Israel for 430 years. But I believe that Pastor Akron has a different notion. So tonight he's going to tell us how many years actually they were in slavery. And the king who started the enslavement of the children of Israel, was he the same king that Moses went to meet or otherwise? So we'll find out from tonight's scripture. So let me invite you to join us. Of course, you know the number to call in. The number to call into the studio is still the same. It's still the same. It's 240-280-263, or you can text, which I believe some of you do. It's 510-931-0946. 510-931-0946, and we'll be here to answer your questions in the text. All right, let me go to my big old buddy, Nisaba. Any updates for us before we roll on? Anything you want to share?
Well, in Ghana, they said one Kwabena Dubois, a lot of corrupt practices have been traced to his name, and therefore they are charging him. Meanwhile, the Attorney General is pursuing a media trial of this guy, and I don't seem to get why so. He being such a lawyer should know that you don't poison the well before. I mean, as far as trials are concerned, once you've charged the guy, let the courts do their job. So
is it a Dubois of MPP?
No, not the presidential candidate. This will be his son.
I remember he was part of Donado's government, I believe.
I think he was either the director or the deputy director of the National Signals Bureau, right? And then of course, we buried the Pope.
You and Hood buried him. Were you there? Were you there when they buried him?
We buried the Pope, and now on the 7th, the cardinals will go into conclave and then choose a new
Cardinal Texan will be chosen.
and I prophesy in advance that
Cardinal Peter Texan will be chosen, the first African Pope.
And he will choose the name Pope Apia Kodo.
Okay, on to you. Until you, everything was fine until you said Apia Kojo. That one, I don't know.
Who says he must take an European name?
Oh, I didn't say that. But where is the Apia Kojo coming from? I mean,
yeah, but that's his name.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Texan, that's his full name.
All right. Thank you very much. That's fine. We'll take it. If that's what he wants, that would be fine. That would be very African. So we'll roll with it. We'll roll with it. Yeah, that's fine. Well, today is May Day, and I believe it was holiday in Ghana, so they have enjoyed their holiday. In the US, it was a prayer day, so it's been a day full of prayers. Hopefully, things will turn around in our country. All right, we are going back to our study. Before we go, let me remind you where you are, and then we'll zoom into our study. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. Stay here for the next 51 minutes. Hold on.
Chimafidi non kotu era one radio. Jumpe bietia. Chimafidi non kotu era one radio. Oh, ayum pamchima. Chintu, asam pamchima. Chintu, egratum chima. Era one, lebo yung pamchima.
All right, we are back to the studio, Era One. We are broadcasting live on Facebook, YouTube, and also on TikTok. Tonight, we are looking at the topic, Desperate King, Desperate Measures, Part 2. And so to bring you to speed, to let you catch up what we've been discussing, I'm going to take the permission from Pastor Kon and read Exodus chapter 1, from 7 to 22, so that we'll catch up on where we began from. We'll go into the argument series, and of course, when it comes to argument, Pastor Kron has a PhD in that. So tonight he will unveil that to us, and we'll learn more from the strategy and the tricks of argument. All right. So let me start from 7, and then we'll move on. It says, "And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, and multiplied and waxed exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land." 11. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. 13. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. 15. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shipra, and the name of the other Pua. And he said, When ye do the office of a midwife, that's when you do that job, to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. Gender bias. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said unto them, Why have you done this thing, and have saved the men children alive? And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively, and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. Before they even ready to have the baby, is there already. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. 21. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, Every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. All right, Pastor Kron. So let's see, getting to the end the king's strategies were not working. Well, he started by, okay, afflict them, give them more work, make life miserable for them, so that they will get tired, they will wax low, reduce to normal, and die off or something. That didn't work. Then she used an internal strategy. She did not even go externally to recruit the Egyptians to be the midwives for this what is a pregnant woman. She recruited women from even amongst the Israelites to even do the work, the dirty work for them. But the women were very smart, filled with the Spirit of God then. So they also outsmarted the king and said, hey, before the woman even give birth, whilst they are, dilating or whatever, the babies just gush out. That didn't work. The Pharaoh won't be and say, no, now, if I can't get the midwives to kill their children, we'll dump them into the river. This king was desperate, and he would try to use all kinds of desperate measures to bring about his purpose. All right, now, Pastor Akron, take it over from here. Let's go into the argument series. What you have for us today?
Okay. Dr. Boison, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
And thank you to our listeners for the opportunity to share the word of God with them.
Amen.
And this part of today's session will seem more like an intellectual exercise. And some people will say it's more philosophical than spiritual. So let me lay out the argument there before we even tackle the text. Who told or taught Christians that the Bible is only about the spirit? The Bible is about the mind and the spirit working in tandem to effect and bring about change in the world. And God designed it that way. And the history of the gospel is there to show that wherever Christianity has taken firm roots, enlightenment ultimately occurred. With that sort of argument, I will tackle the text and I'll deal with some of the hard arguments presented. And I'll start with verse 10. In verse 10, the king presented, in fact, you go to verse 16, verse 9, the king actually makes a factual statement and then uses verse 10 to argue out what they must do to literally prevent or preempt a particular result from happening. And in verse 9, he said, the people of the children of Israel are more. The children of the people of Israel are mightier. Comparison, right? They are more than the Egyptians. They are mightier than the Egyptians. But Dr. Boison, before we tackle this argument, let me crave your indulgence to allow me to deal with something that we scratched the surface some time ago, but didn't thoroughly do that. So let me deal with this. Would the Israelites be considered Egyptians? The text obviously doesn't support that. So
bless you.
Let's really establish the various classes that constituted the people of Egypt. And then we'll make sense of that text, and then we'll understand why one group enslaved the other, right? So if we take the whole land and people of Egypt to be the country of Egypt, right? The country of Egypt becomes, insert your parent. Say,
But if all the Israelites at this time were born in Egypt, then just like in America, we'll call them Egyptians. I mean, by
yes,
birth or something.
yes, absolutely. But that is what you and I will believe should be the case. But was that the case? Apparently not. Right? So we want to examine what really was happening for this sort of sorry state to become a reality. And for the king to say the children of Israel are mightier and more than we, straight away he had divided the nation of Israel into two classes.
Groups, yeah. Because at this time in their lives, all Israel knew was that they are part of the country, because the initial 70 people that came to Israel, I mean Egypt, were all dead and gone so many
Yes.
years ago. So that is the only home they know. They can't even think
Yes,
about their
absolutely.
grandfather's, home or something.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely. 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 So one would think that they should be bona fide citizens of the land. And apparently not so. And if we delve a bit deeper, we'll realize the king made certain statements that will suggest that the Israelites themselves had promoted that sort of fear amongst the Egyptians.
do we have any research study as to the color difference between the Egyptians and the Israelites, and then the accent, the intonation, was it very distinct?
They most probably had the same color. In fact, because Dr. Boison, some parts of this text will let us know that the Israelites were actually asked to dwell in Goshen, right? Which will be spatial discrimination, right? Like what happened to Black people and still happens. Right?
But I think the Pharaoh at that time, when Joseph had finished interpreting the dream and brought his his family was that because they were nomads, or because they were animal shepherds and goat heads and all that, he thought at that time that was the most appropriate land for them to occupy for their occupation, their animals and all that. So pretty much, and I think Bible also indicates that that was a very fertile land for the Israelites to settle. So,
yeah, but the text will tell us here in verse 7 that you read that the land was filled with them. So the Israelites were in all parts of Egypt,
country, okay,
not only in Goshen. Are you getting me? Yeah. So if said later in this Exodus, you'll get to know that the Israelites lived mostly in Goshen, then discrimination, some sort of discrimination has started. Because, Dr. Boison, if the Israelites had a different color than the Egyptians, and everybody would agree at this time, the Egyptians were black. They were black. They were Africans, true Africans. They looked like sub-Saharan Africans, right? If the Egyptians were black and the Israelites were of a different hue, a different color, then there would have been no need for spatial discrimination.
It wasn't even possible they intermarried or something. So that is also a possibility.
Well, you have America where one drop of black blood in you turned 99% of white blood in you or some other black blood into a black person, right? That's the American rule. A drop of black blood in you, even if your mother is full white, your father is 75% white and only 25% black. The fact that you are black, that's enough to turn you into black. So We know that, right? But what we are dealing with here, the argument, the question you asked, if the Israelites were of a different color than the Egyptians, then there would have been no need, absolutely no need for spatial discrimination. Their color of the Israelites, which would be different from the Egyptians, should have given them out. You getting me? So something else, right? Something else had to be the reason the Israelites could be singled out from the Egyptians. Something else, but not color. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, something else, but not color. And if the text makes us to understand in verse 7 that they grew mighty, they multiplied, they waxed mighty, they were fruitful, they were exceedingly whatever, and the land was filled with them, right? Then that possibly could be a giveaway that they tended to be more prosperous than the Egyptians, right? And so their prosperity will be an identifier, an identification that will make it possible for an Egyptian to distinguish an Egyptian from an Israelite, but not color. Is that a good argument?
Yeah,
okay. So now we go in. Who will constitute the class of Egyptians and who would constitute the class of Israelites in this text, right? Now, let's put certain things there, some facts, right? Let's use the fact that residential status, right, was the same. Both the Egyptians and the children of Israel lived or resided in Egypt. Now, the next thing, the author text tells us that a new king arose who knew not Joseph, which will give us a clue that at this time, the Joseph was a marker to identify his descendants, right? So one of the ways to identify an Israelite would be to check if Joseph was an ancestor
to them. By DNA testing.
Well, one way or the other, yes, right? So if you happened to identify yourself as a descendant of Joseph, that was your badge, right? That was what put you in the class of Israelites. So Egyptians at this time will be everybody who resided in Egypt, but did not identify Joseph as an ancestor.
Okay, makes sense.
And the Israelites will be people who resided in Egypt and identified Joseph as an ancestor. So that will be the sharp distinction between the Israelite and the Egyptians. And therefore, when this king spoke, and the author tells us that a new king arose who did not know Joseph, that was quite a heavy statement, right? Because one group that was going to be at the suffering end or the receiving end of punishment would identify Joseph as an ancestor, and the one who will actually be identified on the giving end, the Egyptians, will be one that did not have Joseph as an ancestor. And so you became a slave because of Joseph. The same reason you became a citizen of Egypt, which was you identified with Joseph, right? Because Joseph brought about the prosperity of Egypt, was what qualified these people who were not originals of Egypt, the indigenous to Egypt, to become Egyptians, right? Or residents of Egypt because of the good works of Joseph. Now that same thing is being used on the reverse side, right? If you identified as a descendant of Joseph, then it was a sufficient condition or a necessary condition, whichever we'll get to understand it, to belong to the class of the children of Israel. And if you belong to the children of Israel, then you could be enslaved and would be enslaved. Is that making sense?
So far.
Amen. Now, with that out of the way,
The preamble.
verse 10. And folks, we'll be dealing with the arguments in verse 10, verse 15 and 16, and verse 19. This text is full of arguments. And so maybe today, next week, and the next, we will learn the tricks of argument and how to use them to understand the Bible at a deeper and a higher level. Amen.
Amen.
Now, the king says in verse 9, the children of Israel are more than us. 1. The children of Israel are mightier than we. Let's go back. These are two propositions. Dr. Boison, we dealt with propositions long ago, right? Now we are going to deal with them again. So, what is a proposition? A proposition is a declarative statement which has two possible values, either yes or no. So, any sentence, a proposition is still a sentence, but it is the type of sentence that makes a statement, and that statement that sentence makes could be either true or false. So when the king in verse 9 says the children of Israel are more than we, that will constitute one proposition, one premise in an argument. Right? How many possibilities? 2, because it could be true or it could be false. And then he said the children of Israel are mightier than we. That is also another proposition which could be true or it could be false. Right, Dr. Boison? So we have how many premises now or propositions already made in verse 9? 2.
4.
Right?
2. 2 plus
4 possibilities. What we call cardinalities, right?
Okay.
The cardinality of the 2 propositions is 4 possibilities, right? Now, then he goes and then launches into a conditional argument. A conditional argument is the type where you have the if and then type of argument. Now, in an if-then argument, anything that follows the if statement or if word is what we call the antecedent. And then anything that follows the then is what we call the consequent. So, if we turn verse 10 into a conditional argument, actually in proper or what we call formal form, then it will be like this. If we don't deal wisely with the children of Israel, then they will multiply. And it will happen that war will break out. Right? And the Israelites will join our enemies and they will fight against us. And then they will escape from the land. Dr. Boison, this is a very complex argument because there are three conditional arguments rolled into one giant conditional argument. So let's identify the first antecedent, right? The first antecedent is if we don't deal wisely with them, then, which is the consequent, will be everything after let us deal wisely with them, right? So the one big consequence there will be made up of multiple propositions. The first one is then they will multiply. So now we have how many premises? 3, right? They will multiply, which is a declarative statement because it could be true, it could be false, right? So now we have 3 propositions. The first proposition, the children of Israel are more than the Egyptians. Second proposition, the children of Israel are mightier than the Egyptians.
So do we get 2 to the third power 8?
Now we have, they will multiply. The children of Israel will multiply. That's 3. So 2 raised to the power 3, 8 possibilities, right? And then he goes on and says, war will fall out. But he uses the conditional argument, when there falleth out a war, which actually equates to if war breaks out. So that is also, that's the second conditional argument in this big conditional argument.
So with the when means that it could, I mean, it's a possibility.
That's a possibility.
It's a matter of time.
When in argument, in conditional argument, when and if are both conditional, because it is in the future and you have no control over what will happen, right? So the proper terms to use is certainty and certitude. Don't worry too much, right? With certainty, when we say when, right, it is a given, but it is still in the future, which is unknown, right? Certitude is a little bit looser than certainty, right? And so we'll use may, right? So these are some of the tricks of argument, right? But he says, so now we have, it will come to pass, I mean, they will multiply as a third premise, right? And then war will break out. That is fourth, right? War will break out, true or false, because that's a declarative sentence, right? So that's a proposition. So now we have 4 what? Arguments or premises there, or statements, which will take us to raised to the power 4, which will give us 16 possibilities, right? Then he says the children of Israel may join our enemies. That is true, and it could be false. It could be true, it could be false. So that is the 5th proposition. That takes us to raised to the power 5. That will give us what? 32 possibilities. You see how all of a sudden this is knowledge growing right before our eyes, right? And then said, not only would they join us, but they will fight us, right? The children of Israel will fight against us. So that is a position also.
As a form of
True
revenge.
or false, right? So now we have how many propositions? 6 propositions, taking us to 2 raised to the power 6. How many? 64 possibilities. These are ideas. And then the last one, they may get out or escape from the land, true or false. That takes us to what? 7 propositions, right? And that will give us 2 raised to the power 7, 128 possibilities.
28.
Right? And then we come to the antecedent itself. We have to deal wisely with them, which is a declarative statement, true or false, right? That will give us how many propositions? 8. So verse 10 alone, you have 8 propositions with 256 possibilities.
Wow.
That's verse 10. That's verse 10. Dr. Boison. And if you want me to go deeper into it, then we will look at this from what we call the ontological model.
Perspective.
And let me give them, right? Because this is serious knowledge for us. Whenever you see a sentence connects 2 entities, right? And so you identify the 3 parts of the sentence. Every sentence has 3 parts: the subject, the predicate, and the object. That's the brutal knowledge one has to get, right? And so the predicate is what we call the relationship, right, that connects a subject and an object. Now, 9 out of 10, the subject is a class, the object is also a class. So the property, the relationship, right, the predicate is what acts as the relationship to connect one class to the other. Dr. Boison. That's
Yes,
another.
sir.
So just 8 propositions, right? You are going to get at least 8 classes. And the reason I say at least, it is possible the subject and the object belong to the same class. But if the subject belongs to a different class and the object also belongs to a different class, then you are going to deal with 16 different entities connected by 8 relationships.
Wow.
Just verse 10. This is what we call knowledge engineering.
Wow.
Right? Right? So already, in terms of raw ideas, verse 10 will give us 256 possibilities because we have 8 propositions there. And 2 raised to the power 8 is 256 ideas. Now, let's step back and now break them down into the argument we want to pursue today. Dr. Boison, if we understand that verse 10 has 3 conditional arguments embedded in it, so we have to break those 3 conditional arguments down, identify them. The first one, therefore, will be the Israelites, if we don't deal wisely, if we don't deal wisely with Israel,
You multiply.
then Israel will multiply. right?
Wow.
Then the second conditional argument is if war breaks out, then they will join our enemies. Right? And the third conditional argument, if they join our enemies, then they will fight against us.
I mean, can you imagine a war breaking out between US and Canada and expecting some
Yeah.
US citizens here to fight with Canada and then they will escape and run away?
Yeah. Possibility, right? Or US and Mexico, which is far likelier than US with Canada. Right? Yeah. Think about it. Are you getting the this is how you are able to build knowledge, right? So you are able to identify parts, right? So you break apart, which we call analysis, and then you bring the parts together, which we call synthesis, right? So we've done our analysis. We've identified three conditional arguments all rolled into one big argument, right? Big conditional argument. So Dr. Boison, the question for verse 10 is, what did the king fear? Right? Because for him to say, let us deal wisely with them, right? He didn't say it in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Right? It was a palpable fear. And so we need to identify what that fear was, for which all these arguments
Emanated.
or propositions, right, came into being. Right? Now, he gave it out here that they will escape from the land. And that, Dr. Boison, is something we also need to pursue. It might seem as if the Israelites in this particular text were just innocent doves. It looked like so. They just were enslaved for no reason. And that's the popular idea most preachers will have us believe, right? But for the king to say they will get them or escape from the land, right? That should cause us to take a pause, to pause a little and ask, why would he make such a statement? Could it just be that the Israelites had given serious indications that if they got the chance,
They will escape.
they would like to be their own people rather than be part of Egypt?
That's a thought-provoking question. Yeah.
Yes, because for the king to make such a statement, one could argue, and I mean there are enough points in here to really arrive at a conclusion that the king was just using all these points as pretext because his goal was something else.
Yeah,
Even
but
if Israel,
of course, if you maltreat somebody, it will come out evidently somewhere that they will be at least making a little bit of snippets of not, I wouldn't even use the word protest, but in conversational terms, they will be saying, hey, if we get this, we can do this. I mean, it's possible. I mean, didn't we even experience in a part of this country that some people were saying that if certain particular people won election, they will leave their country? Yeah, it's true. So it's possible that they've got to a point where either they've been maltreated or they've been too abused. Or you know what? We can't take this anymore.
Dr. Boison, I like that argument, but let's look at history. Let's look at history, and then let's look at the contemporary scene. Between America and the state of Israel in our contemporary times, who has the typical Jew in America? Between America and Israel, who has his loyalty?
Well, I would say Israelites are more loyal.
To whom? To Israel or America? Even if they were born in America.
Are you talking about those inhabitants here?
Yes. And anywhere else. Between Israel and America, I'm asking a simple question. Take the typical Israel, a typical Jew in Manhattan or anywhere in America. Between America and Israel, which of the two countries has the loyalty of a typical Jew in America?
I would say the Jew won't go back to his native land.
So it lends credence to what we've always said. These Bible narratives are not about what happened, but what happened.
Well, they might like some form of prosperity here, but native-wise, they would want to go back.
Yes, that is the brutal truth about human life. You and myself, right? Let's be clear. We migrated from Ghana. I'm sure, just like me, when you were coming, you thought, oh, Ghana, I'm done with you. I ain't coming back. America, yeah, I come. After staying here or living here for some time, you begin to realize that Ghana is abroad.
Well, it's subjective.
Oh, I mean, I'm saying from experience and from what I've heard at this, right? Yeah. Whether we like it, there is this thing about call it nativity, right? Or nativism, right? There is something about us that no matter what, in Ghana, Ghanaians have a proverb that you don't use your left hand to
your
point
village
to your father's house.
It is
right?
true, but
So, it's human. So when this king says something to this effect, that the Israelites will use this occasion of war breaking out and they join in with the enemy of Egypt and then becoming an enemy of Egypt themselves, they will use that to further their long-term agenda of self-determination.
But Pastor Akwa, let me just remind you a minute that human nature is something you cannot easily predict human being. For instance, this same Israelites, if we fast forward to years after Moses was born, he came to liberate them. They went to the land they were supposed to go, and at a point they began to murmur, couldn't you have left us in Egypt to eat our
because they met a situation. Dr. Boison, they met a situation. That's the point. They met a situation, and that's human nature.
Yes, there's always a comparative aspect. Right? People always want to compare. If you're in this land right now, you mentioned Ghana. Trust me, you go to Ghana, live there for a couple of years, and then you say, "Oh,
I will start complaining."
Yes, if I was in US, I'll just walk to 2 meters and get to ATM machine and grab all the money I want. Why can't I do it here? How come it's too hot? So we always keep on comparing and comparing, no matter what.
Dr. Boison, me, Nisa Barako, right? we talk, call me, my whatever ways. I've lived in America for all this while, whatever. I'm enlightened, I'm educated, whatever. You know something? One day I sat down and I started writing. I said, casually, and I said, did I say that? I told my wife, if I die, take my body to Ghana and bury me near my father and my mother.
I'll make
I said
I'll
it
make sure
and
that happens because no soil discriminating human being. We'll bury you here so we can come and visit you every Thanksgiving and all that stuff.
all I'm saying is where that thought came from. But I realized that it is something I will love.
But you know, I also
Nature.
told my wife that let's say we visit Ghana and I die. Please carry my bones back to the US and bury me so I can have a nice cemetery and you guys can just walk in the garden and come and see me.
Nonsense. No, but Dr. Boison, I mean, what we are doing here, right, is making this test become real, right? That it is human experience you are dealing with,
That's true.
right? The intellectual, call it firepower in the text, that one must have the ability to tease out from a simple text like this, right? You realize that what you call simple is seriously the coming together or the synthesis of different ideas, right? And we don't seem to realize those ideas have been brought together. And we go about our merry way. But through wisdom and through power lies in understanding the various ideas that have come together to give you that one single, so seemingly simple idea. And that's what we call analysis. And when you bring it out, that's what you call the synthesis. And so when you have the ability to synthesize and the ability to analyze, you are a winner. That is what this platform is seeking to equip our listeners with, the ability to analyze a text and synthesize it, right? Because when you analyze, you are able to identify the different parts that came together. And Dr. Boison, you always make this statement. Pastor Cron will take a simple text and make it complex, and then bring it back to simple. It is true because every simple text is made up of different parts, and each part has a story to tell. Are you getting me? So if you know the story that a part tells, and then you take all the parts and all the stories they tell, and you create one story out of the many stories told by the many parts, you begin to see complexity and you begin to understand the world.
But Pastor, before we leave, we have just about 4 minutes. So before we did promise that we'll answer the question about how many years Israel was in slavery. And also, let me go to this point about leadership. I'm concerned about leadership because if you look at this king, Pharaoh, I mean, the Pharaoh was just a title. I mean, it might be a real name. But if you look at the leadership aspect of this Pharaoh, one wonders, was this guy the sole decision maker, or did he have a cabinet? I know with the pharaohs, they had the power, just like our monarchs or kings, to do whatever they had to do. But was he taking decisions solely by himself, or he had a sycophantic cabinet around him to say yes to everything? Because what he did, it's around the world. It's contemporary to our days. It's going on around the world. We have leaders who are doing the same thing. So one begs the question whether is that what happened? We are not told whether, although he spoke to his people, but then we don't know whether this guy took a sole decisional, whatever method he used to disseminate his information, or he had a cabinet that was always saying yes, without even thinking about the ramifications. And that really bothers me about some of the current leadership that we have operating in the world.
Yeah, Dr. Boison. Again, my good old people, the Gans, we have a proverb. It goes like this. Ichokome ya ajina.
Okay.
One head does not go into council, right? So one head cannot form a cabinet. But for a king, you have advisors. Every king will have advisors, right? But it turns out that 9 out of 10, looking at the power of the king, right? And you factor in the human condition, where 99% of the time you want to hear what you want to hear, right? The king will necessarily, most of the time, go for yes people.
Mm-hmm.
You get me?
Loyalist. Yeah.
Yeah, because those people have everything to lose if they oppose the king or they say something contrary to what the king wants to hear, right? And so that is life. This king most likely had his yes men who should have seen the danger and chose to hold their peace.
But I believe in those days, I'm just assuming in those, if if you're a cabinet member, you oppose the king, they had the right to execute you. Maybe that was for the fear of for them.
Yeah. So for one reason or the other, self-preservation being one of them, you go with the yes. You tell the king what he wants to hear.
But at the
Right?
end of the
At the
day,
end-
how does your conscience even work for you? That okay, you just said yes.
Dr. Boison. They say the first order of business for every living organism is survival.
Of the fittest.
Right? So if I have to tell the king the truth, and the truth will send me to my grave, do you think I'll tell him the truth?
Well, John the Baptist did it. He was chopped. He was
Well,
chopped.
that's why he was called John the Baptist, not Robert.
And he said he was taking off.
Yeah. I mean, these are some of the things. They are hard facts of life. The ideal will be to act according to the dictates of your conscience, right? But 9 out of 10 will act according to the dictates of our hearts. Why? Because at the end of the day, we want our soul, body, and whatever together. We want to be alive. Are you understanding? So whatever will promote my life, my being alive, may actually hold sway. And if on that occasion it happens to be my heart and not my head, right? So be it. It's a fact of life we can't run away from, right? So, Dr. Boison, let's get back to this. You asked the question, right? We've already answered who was a citizen of Egypt at this time. We've answered it, right? Everybody but Israelites was a citizen. And the way to identify an Israelite was that he had what? Joseph as an ancestor, period. Right? And so now let's recenter what we came here to do today. We haven't exhausted it. At least we've analyzed it very
out of time.
The argument, right? The conditional argument, right? And we've identified 3 different conditional arguments rolled together into one argument in verse 10. And in verse 10, we've actually identified, in verse 9 and 10, we've identified 8 propositions, which will give us 256 possibilities or ideas. Right? So, Dr. Boison, can you imagine the whole of verse 1? If we are to turn the whole of chapter 1 into propositions, right? This text will actually have over 1 billion ideas in it. Are you getting me? And that's how you build knowledge. And at the end of the day, we know knowledge is what?
Power.
So next week, God willing, if Jesus tarries, we will take the same verse 10. Don't forget, we have verse 15 and 16 and 19 to deal with. We'll take verse 10 and deal with what we call sufficiency and necessity. Right? In every conditional argument, the antecedent, we always say, is a necessary, no, it's a sufficient condition, right, for the truth of the antecedent. And the antecedent is a necessary condition for the truth of the antecedent. Let me repeat it. In every conditional argument, we have two parts, the if part and the then part. The if part, we call it antecedent. The then part, we call it the consequence, right? The antecedent, the if part, is always is a sufficient condition for the truth of the consequence. And then when you flip it, the consequence is a necessary condition for the truth of the antecedent. Which is to say, if we are able to identify the fear of this king, and we take this test and we identify the antecedent, then we can say that all the points that constitute the consequence are necessary. They are necessary conditions for the truth of the antecedent. So let's take one. If the king says, if we don't deal wisely with Israel, then Israel will multiply, right? Israel will multiply is a necessary condition for the truth of not dealing wisely with Israel. And not dealing wisely with Israel is sufficient, it's a sufficient condition for the truth of Israel multiplying.
Wow. Well, listeners, we are out of time, 7:06. But I must say that this has been interesting because one interesting thing about this program, when you come here, not only are you learning the historical aspect of the Bible, but you go home rich in English and literature. The man sitting in front of me, a historian and a literature man, will give you all the antecedents and the consequence, the precedents, the proposition. So you come here rich in so many subjects. You come and your brain is expanded. This is not just reading the spirit behind the Bible. We go beyond that. We use our brains, and it makes you very intellectual, very analytical. If you meet a situation in life, you begin to ask yourself and you apply these principles. If A, then B. If antecedent, then consequent, and all that. By the way, I think I just had a hint from Jesus that he still hasn't received his visa from God to come down anytime soon. So hopefully next week, by God's grace, we are going to meet again. If he gives him the visa that he's ready to come down, I will let you know. Otherwise, make a date with us next week and we'll continue. I thought we were going to go beyond and answer the question, how many days Israel actually stayed in slavery. I mean, we read 430, but Pastor Kron says it's way less than that. So we'll come back and answer that question next week. But then, of course, our time is far gone. And so, Pastor Kron, thank you very much for the wisdom that you always come to pour here. We have this information free, so sometimes we don't value, but trust me, you're not going to get this information anywhere. So please don't be selfish. Share this video or clip to your friends. It's available on Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. Share them. And some of you go to TikTok and you are only watching naked bodies and porn and all that. They don't inspire you to do anything. This will let you think. This will make you very analytical in your everyday life, in your marriage, everywhere. You can analyze stuff. You meet a situation, you ask yourself, if this, Then what next? And all that. We have to expand. That is the essence of education. We go to school to expand our brains. There is what you call fienyansa, the knowledge that you get just by growing in a home or whatever. There's those aspects to what you learn coming from books. When you combine these two, you are a full and holistic human being. So thank you for tuning in and listening to those of you who joined us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pastor Akron. I am always blessed. Not only do I moderate, but then I learn so much. Anytime we come here, I go back a better person, wiser and more knowledgeable. So thank you very much. Keep doing your research. I mean, I like to suck from your research. Keep researching and come and pour on us. We are always ready to suck. So whatever you find out from your studies on your research, we are ready to absorb it so that one day we'll also be good teachers like you. So thank you very much. Well, listeners, on behalf of my studio manager, Dr. Setutu, and the Era One team, thank you. This has been the Divine Connection Show, and I've been your host, Charles Weston. I will see you again next week. Stay blessed and know that our God reigns. Jesus is still the Lord. I mean, like I said earlier on, he hasn't received a visa yet, because when he asked Jesus, when are you coming, he says, even not me, I don't know. It's only the Father who knows. So hopefully we'll meet again next week, God willing. Have a good evening and stay blessed. Bye-bye, Doc. I will see you tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Bye-bye.
Chimafidi nunkotu Era One Radio Samupe Jumpe Dietia Chimafidi nunkotu Era One Radio Ayumpampuma Chintu Asampampuma Chintu Ekratumuma Era One
They are four women. They are beautiful with brains. They are eloquent, decent, wise, and experienced. You have heard many, the funny. Now, it's time to hear the experience and the brainy. Meet Selena, Dorcas, Gifty, and Annette as they present the real in common getting. In common BISS chain, the dead, as in Takrenu assume the dead, the real in common getting. Showing live this and every Sunday, 7 p.m. on Era One Radio on Facebook and on YouTube, Era One Radio and on Taibo channel. Kaise, so we see the real in common getting ya. What brabontete, we nyan konkonsa, we the real in common getting.
Everyone on the ark now! I'm going home.
And then you know we saw happy radio, yes you go, yes you go.